This little girl reveals a secret at the millionaire's wake, startling everyone by saying something no one expected. Then moments later, what she shows them is even worse. Rate my story from 0 to 10 in the comments. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The scream sliced through the solemn silence of St. Anthony's Chapel like a sharp knife, echoing off the century-old stone walls in Harmony Creek. It was the eve of the 4th of July, and the air carried the scent of barbecues beginning to be lit around town, mixed with the smell of candles and wilting flowers that dominated the funereal atmosphere. Iris, just 4 years old, emerged from behind the last pew of the chapel like a small, frightened ghost. Her clothes, torn and dirty, contrasted sharply with the solemnity of the moment, her bare feet making muffled sounds on the cold marble floor. She had hidden there during the night, fleeing the torrential rain that had lashed the town, seeking only a warm place to sleep. "The casket is empty!" she screamed again, her childish voice echoing through the chapel's arches. "The man isn't in there!" The murmur that spread among those present was like the buzzing of angry bees. More than 200 people had come to the wake of Oswald Montgomery, patriarch of one of the most influential families in the cotton region of Georgia. Businessmen, local politicians, farmhands, and employees of the cotton gin he had built over 5 decades of hard work were there to pay their last respects. Cassius Montgomery, 42, the deceased's only son, felt his legs weaken. Tall and impeccably dressed in his tailored black suit, he personified the successful entrepreneur he had become. His graying temples and rigid posture betrayed years of pressure and responsibility. The perfectionism that had characterized him since childhood now manifested itself in every detail of the wake he had meticulously organized. "This is absurd," he muttered, adjusting his tie with trembling hands. "A disturbed child can't—" But the words died in his throat when he looked at the polished mahogany casket that dominated the center of the chapel. Something about the situation disturbed him deeply. He had noticed a strange lightness when he had carried the casket, but he had attributed it to his own emotional exhaustion. Marina Sullivan, 38, owner of Sullivan Funeral Home, felt the blood run cold in her veins. A widow for 3 years, she had taken over the family business with determination, but always struggling against her tendency to flee when the pressures became too intense. Her brown hair was pulled back in a perfect bun, and her discreet black dress reflected the seriousness with which she took her work. "Child, you need to leave here," Marina said, approaching Iris with cautious steps. "This is not a place for games." "I saw," Iris insisted, her large, dark eyes shining with a mixture of fear and determination. "Men took something heavy out of the casket during the night. I was hiding back there and I saw everything." Dr. Reginald Baker, 55, medical examiner and close friend of the Montgomery family, felt a knot form in his stomach. His well-groomed grey beard could not hide the pallor that had spread across his face. He had signed Oswald's death certificate just 2 days before, after finding him in his bed, apparently the victim of a heart attack during his sleep. "This is impossible," Dr. Baker murmured, more to himself than to others. "I examined the body myself. Oswald was—" His voice trailed off as an elderly woman in the front row rose with difficulty, leaning on her cane. Mrs. Eugenia, a neighbor of the Montgomerys for more than 40 years, pointed a trembling finger at the casket. "I always knew there was something strange," she said in a hoarse voice. "Oswald hadn't been looking well in recent weeks, but not like this. Not in a way to leave so suddenly." The murmuring grew among those present. Cassius felt control of the situation, slipping through his fingers like fine sand. His whole life had been built on order, planning, and absolute control of details. The idea that something could have gone wrong at such an important moment was unacceptable. "Open the casket," he ordered suddenly, his voice cutting through the murmur of the crowd. Marina took a step forward, her face pale with horror. Cassius, we can't. There are protocols, procedures, the funeral home's reputation. Open it now, Cassius shouted, completely losing the composure he had maintained for decades. Dr. Baker hesitated, his hands trembling slightly. As a doctor, he knew that something was deeply wrong in the situation, but his tendency to avoid confrontation paralyzed him. Throughout his career, he had always opted for the safest path, avoiding situations that could generate conflict or questions. Two funeral home employees approached the casket with special keys. The silence in the chapel was so deep that one could hear every creak of the old hinges as the lid was slowly opened. What they found inside made several people scream in horror and astonishment. Clothes carefully arranged to simulate the shape of a body, rocks wrapped in sheets to add weight, and an old doll with a porcelain face positioned where Oswald's head should have been. Marina staggered backward, her hand flying to cover her mouth. Her funeral home had operated in the town for 3 generations and had never faced a scandal of this magnitude. The reputation she had taken years to build was collapsing before her eyes. "How is this possible?" she whispered, tears of despair beginning to form in her eyes. Cassius remained still, staring fixedly at the interior of the empty casket. His rational mind tried to process what he was seeing, but no logical explanation made sense. Oswald Montgomery, the man who had built a cotton empire from scratch, who had never shown a day of weakness in his entire life, had simply disappeared. Iris, still standing in the middle of the center aisle, watched the adults with her large, attentive eyes. Even at 4 years old, she understood that something very serious was happening. During her nights on the streets of Harmony Creek, she had learned to observe, to perceive details that adults often ignored. "I told you I saw," she repeated softly, but her voice carried a certainty that made some of those present turn to look at her with new attention. Dr. Baker approached the casket, his doctor's hands automatically examining the arrangement of clothes and rocks. There was something familiar about the staging, something that awakened a distant memory in his mind. Oswald had always been a meticulous man, detail-oriented even in the smallest aspects of his life. "Someone planned this carefully," the doctor murmured, his voice laden with a growing and terrifying understanding. At that moment, reality began to dawn on all those present. They were not dealing with a common robbery or a funeral home error. They were facing something much more complex and disturbing, something that would call into question everything they believed they knew about Oswald Montgomery and the secrets he had taken with him beyond life. The hours following the discovery of the empty casket transformed the tranquil Harmony Creek into a whirlwind of speculation and suspicion. Cassius had ordered everyone present to remain in the chapel while he tried to understand what had happened, but the news had spread through the streets like wildfire. Marina remained seated in the first pew of the chapel, her face in her hands, while her mind processed the implications of the disaster. 3 generations of her family had built the reputation of Sullivan Funeral Home based on trust and respect. Now, in a matter of hours, everything was being destroyed. She could already imagine the phone calls from clients cancelling services, the whispered comments on the streets, the distrust that would stain her name forever. "I need to go home," she murmured, standing up abruptly. Her tendency to flee from problems when the pressure became unbearable was taking over her mind. "I need to think, I need to—" "Marina, you can't leave now," Cassius said, his voice as tense as a rope about to break. "We need to find out what happened. My father—" "Where is my father?" Dr. Baker watched Iris, who had sat down in a corner of the chapel, playing silently with a piece of string she had found on the floor. The child seemed oblivious to the chaos she had unleashed, but there was something in her eyes that intrigued him, an intelligence beyond her 4 years, an ability to observe that he rarely saw in adults. "Little girl," he said, approaching cautiously, "can you tell us exactly what you saw during the night?" Iris looked up, studying the doctor's bearded face attentively. During her months living on the streets, she had learned to distinguish between adults who could help her and those who posed a danger. Something in Dr. Baker's gentle voice made her relax slightly. "I was sleeping back there," she said, pointing to the space between the last pew and the wall. "It was raining a lot, and the man at the door was sleeping. Then I heard noises and hid better." "What kind of noises?" Cassius asked, approaching with impatient steps. "Men talking softly. They opened the big wooden thing and took something heavy out of it. There were 3 men, but it was dark and I couldn't see their faces very well." Marina raised her head, her red eyes fixing on the child. "This is impossible. My employees checked everything before closing the chapel. No one could have entered without—" Her words were interrupted when Joseph, the chapel's night janitor, ran into the room. A man of 60, with completely white hair and hands calloused from decades of work, he looked terrified. "Mr. Montgomery, I'm sorry I'm late. I couldn't get here sooner because—" "Where were you during the night, Joseph?" Cassius asked, his voice laden with suspicion. Joseph hesitated, his eyes scanning the faces of those present before lowering his head in shame. "I received a message yesterday afternoon. A man said he had a package for me at Tony's bar, that it was urgent. When I got there, Tony offered me some moonshine and—" "You drank it and slept at the bar," Dr. Baker finished, immediately understanding what had happened. "It was just one, Doctor. But then I don't remember anything else. I woke up this morning on a park bench with a headache and not understanding how I had gotten there." Cassius felt anger boil in his chest. His entire life had been built on control and predictability, and now he discovered that even the most trusted employees could be manipulated. "Someone planned this," he said, more to himself than to others. "Someone wanted you not to be here during the night." Marina stood up again, this time with more determination. "I need to check the funeral home records. Maybe there's something that went unnoticed in the preparations." As Marina hurriedly left the chapel, Dr. Baker continued his conversation with Iris. There was something in the child's story that bothered him, a disturbing familiarity that he could not identify. "Iris, have you been to this chapel before?" he asked. The girl shook her head, but then hesitated. "Not inside. But sometimes I came here outside because the good man gave me food." "What good man?" "The man who was in the box. He came here on Wednesdays, always at the same time. He brought bread and milk for me and other boys who sleep in the park." Cassius froze. Throughout his adult life, he had criticized his father for what he considered wasting money on needy people in town. Oswald always replied that he had his reasons, but never explained what they were. Now he discovered that his father maintained a regular charitable commitment that he had never mentioned. "Did he talk to you?" continued Dr. Baker. "Sometimes. He asked if I was okay, if I had somewhere to sleep when it rained. Once he told me that he had a granddaughter my age somewhere else, and that he would like someone to take care of her if she needed it." Iris's words hit Cassius like a punch to the stomach. He had never given him grandchildren, never married or even maintained lasting relationships. His obsession with work and control had driven away all the women who had tried to approach him. Now he discovered that his father spoke of a non-existent granddaughter to an abandoned child on the streets. At that moment, Marina returned to the chapel with a look of confusion on her face. In her hands, she carried a folder with documents. "I found something strange," she said, her voice trembling. "Oswald came to the funeral home personally last week. He said he wanted to check all the details of his own funeral." "Is that normal?" Cassius asked. "It's not uncommon for older people to plan their own funerals," Marina replied. "But Oswald was very specific. He brought this sealed envelope and said it should only be opened if something unusual happened during the wake." "Doctor." Baker took the envelope from Marina's trembling hands. It was made of thick paper, with Oswald's personal seal printed in red wax. In the center, a single line written by hand in the patriarch's firm and familiar handwriting: to be opened when the truth comes to light. "Open it," Cassius ordered, but his voice came out weaker than he intended. When Dr. Baker broke the seal and unfolded the letter, the silence in the chapel became absolute. Even Iris stopped playing with her string, as if sensing the gravity of the moment. Oswald's handwriting filled 2 entire pages, and as Dr. Baker read in silence, his expression changed from confusion to horror, then to a terrifying understanding. "What does it say?" Marina asked, her voice just a whisper. Dr. Baker looked up, his face as pale as paper. "He knew this would happen. He planned everything." "This is impossible," Cassius protested. "My father was ill. He was not able to—" "He discovered something, Cassius. Something about you that disappointed him deeply. This letter, it talks about tests, about discovering the true character of the people he loved." Cassius felt his legs weaken again. What kind of tests? At that moment, a sound coming from the entrance of the chapel made everyone turn around. A woman of approximately 40 years had entered silently, her dark hair tied back in a simple ponytail, her clothes modest but clean. Her eyes scanned the group until they fixed on Iris. "Iris!" she exclaimed, running towards the child. To everyone's surprise, Iris stood up and ran towards the woman, who enveloped her in a tight hug. "Constance," murmured Dr. Baker, recognizing the newcomer. "Constance Montgomery." Cassius felt the world spin around him. Constance was his aunt, Oswald's younger sister, who had been banished from the family 20 years ago after becoming involved with a man the family considered unsuitable. Since then, no member of the family had maintained contact with her. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice laden with shock and confusion. Constance raised her eyes, and in them Cassius saw a mixture of pain and determination that made him take a step back. "I came to get my daughter," she said simply, holding Iris close to her chest, "and find out why my brother disappeared on the day he was finally going to reconcile with us." Constance's words echoed through the chapel like thunder, leaving all those present in a state of shock. Cassius stared fixedly at the woman he had not seen for 2 decades, trying to process the information that Iris, the abandoned child who had triggered all the confusion, was his cousin. "Your daughter," he repeated, his voice hoarse. "Constance, you have a daughter." Constance hugged Iris tighter to her chest, her eyes glistening with restrained tears. "Iris was born 3 years after my expulsion from the family, when your father decided that I was no longer worthy of bearing the Montgomery surname." Dr. Baker still held Oswald's letter, but now his attention was completely focused on the scene before him. During all the years he had known the family, he had never questioned Constance's sudden disappearance. Like most people in town, he had simply accepted the official version that she had moved to another region after a family disagreement. "Constance," he said softly, "where have you been all these years? How did Iris end up alone on the streets?" The woman took a deep breath, clearly struggling against painful emotions. "I've been working as a housekeeper in Atlanta for 4 years. Iris stayed with a neighbor during the week, and I would come back on weekends. But 2 months ago, the neighbor got sick and was hospitalized. When I came back the following Saturday, I found our house empty, and Iris had disappeared." Marina, who had remained silent, took a step forward. "Didn't you seek help? Didn't you try to contact the family?" "Contact?" Constance laughed bitterly. "Do you think I didn't try? For 4 years I sent letters to Oswald, tried to call the company. I never got an answer. I thought he had completely forgotten about me." Cassius felt an overwhelming weight on his chest. During all these years, it had been he who controlled the company mail and the calls that came to his father. How many attempts by Constance to contact him had he intercepted and discarded without ever mentioning them to Oswald? "The letters," he murmured, the realization hitting him like a hammer. "You knew," said Constance, her eyes narrowing. "You intercepted my letters. Iris, noticing the growing tension between the adults, held her mother's hand more tightly. "Mommy, the good man said you were coming back. He always said you were coming back." "What good man, my daughter?" "Grandpa Oswald," Iris replied simply, causing everyone in the chapel to hold their breath. Dr. Baker raised the letter again, his hands trembling. "Constance, I think you need to hear what Oswald wrote here." "Read it," she said, her voice firm despite the tears that were beginning to run down her face. Dr. Baker cleared his throat and began to read in a clear voice. "If this letter is being read, it means that my plan worked and the truth has finally come to light. During the last few months, I discovered things about my family that broke my heart in ways I never imagined possible." Cassius felt his legs weaken and leaned on the nearest pew. "I discovered that my son, in whom I placed all my trust, had been intercepting his Aunt Constance's attempts to communicate for years. I discovered that he planned to sell our family business to outside investors, betraying decades of tradition and the sweat of hundreds of families who depend on us." "That's not true," Cassius protested weakly, but his voice lacked conviction. Dr. Baker continued, "Even more painful, I discovered that my granddaughter, Constance's daughter, was living on the streets of our own town, while I, unaware of the situation, continued to send money to Atlanta, believing that it reached them." Marina covered her mouth with her hands, beginning to understand the magnitude of the family tragedy that was unfolding before her eyes. "I sent money?" Constance asked, confused. "Every month," Dr. Baker continued reading. "For 4 years, I sent money through bank transfers to an account I believed was yours. I have now discovered that Cassius created a fake account and diverted the money to his own investments." The silence that followed was deafening. Constance looked at Cassius with an expression of horror and disbelief while he sank into the pew, the weight of his actions finally manifesting in full. "Dad, I thought I was protecting the family," he murmured, but the words sounded empty even to himself. "Protecting it from what?" Constance shouted, her voice echoing through the chapel walls. "From a sister who just wanted a second chance? From an innocent child who wasn't to blame for the adult's mistakes?" Dr. Baker continued reading, his voice now laden with emotion. "That's why I decided to fake my departure. I wanted to see how each person would react. I wanted to find out who really cared about me, beyond the money and the status. I wanted to give Cassius a chance to demonstrate if there was any humanity left in his heart." "Where is he?" Marina asked, her voice just a whisper. "I'm hiding in a safe place where I can observe events without being seen. If Cassius demonstrates that he can change, that he can become the man I always hoped he would be, I will reveal myself during the 4th of July celebrations. Otherwise—" The letter ended abruptly, leaving the threat hanging in the air. Iris broke free from Constance's embrace and walked up to Cassius, her large eyes studying the face of the man who had destroyed her family without ever knowing her. "Are you bad?" she asked with the brutal sincerity that only children possess. The simple question hit Cassius more deeply than any accusation or scream could have done. Looking at that little girl, who had spent months on the streets because of his actions, he clearly saw the monster he had become. I didn't mean to," he began, but the words died in his throat. Constance approached, taking Iris by the hand. "Let's get out of here. We have nothing more to seek from this family." "Wait," said Marina, surprising everyone. "Constance, you can't just disappear again, not now. Oswald clearly wants you two to be part of the reconciliation." "Reconciliation?" Constance laughed bitterly. "With a man who allowed his own granddaughter to live as a beggar. With a family that kicked me out for loving someone they considered unsuitable." Dr. Baker folded the letter carefully, his medical mind processing all the implications of the situation. "Constance, there's something else you need to know. Oswald is ill. Gravely ill." "What do you mean?" "He has a degenerative heart condition. By my calculations, he has at most a few months to live. This may be the last chance you have to reconcile." The revelation hit Constance like a bucket of cold water. As much as she tried to maintain her anger, the news of her brother's illness awakened painful memories of when they were children, when Oswald protected her from the school bullies and shared his favorite toys with her. "A few months," she repeated, her voice breaking. Cassius raised his head, for the first time since the beginning of the conversation, showing something beyond self-pity. "Dr. Baker, why didn't my father tell me about the illness?" "Because you were so obsessed with business that you barely talked to him about personal matters," the doctor replied, with brutal honesty. "Oswald told me he tried to talk to you several times, but you always changed the subject or diverted it to company issues." The truth was like a slow poison spreading through Cassius's mind. For years, he had convinced himself that he was protecting the family legacy, building a solid future for the company. Now he discovered that he had destroyed everything that really mattered, the human relationships that gave meaning to life. "I can fix this," he said suddenly, standing up with desperate determination. "I can find my father. I can bring Constance back to the family. "You can start by returning the money you stole from us," Constance interrupted, her voice as cold as ice. "Yes, of course. All the money with interest. And the company. I'm not going to sell the company. I'm going to—" "Enough," said Constance, holding Iris closer. "I don't want your empty promises, Cassius. I want actions. And I want my brother back, alive and well, so he can get to know his granddaughter properly before—" She couldn't finish the sentence, the tears finally overcoming her resistance. At that moment, Joseph, the janitor, who had remained silent throughout the conversation, approached hesitantly. "Sorry to interrupt," he said, "but there's something you need to know. The man who gave me the message yesterday, I remember now where I saw him before. He works on the Santa Rita farm, that abandoned property that's 15 miles from town." Everyone turned to look at him, and Joseph continued, "Mr. Montgomery bought that farm 3 months ago. He said he wanted a place to be alone and think about life." The 3 months that followed the discovery of the empty casket profoundly transformed the lives of everyone involved. The Santa Rita farm, located in the hills surrounding Harmony Creek, became the epicenter of a family transformation that no one could have predicted. Cassius had insisted on looking for Oswald immediately after Joseph's revelation, but Dr. Baker had convinced him that finding the patriarch would not be enough. It was necessary first to demonstrate a genuine change, to prove that he had understood the lessons his father was trying to teach. Constance had decided to remain in town, renting a small house near the historic downtown, with the money that Cassius had immediately returned, plus significant interest. Iris, for the first time in months, had a safe roof over her head and 3 guaranteed meals a day. Marina faced her own battles. The scandal of the empty casket had spread throughout the region, and 5 families had cancelled contracts with her funeral home. Every night, she fought against the impulse to close the business and flee to another town, but something in the strength demonstrated by Constance inspired her to persist. "I can't just abandon 3 generations of my family's work," she told Dr. Baker during a conversation in the Central Park, where they now met regularly to discuss developments in the situation. "My grandfather built this funeral home to serve the community with dignity. I'm not going to let a scandal destroy that." Dr. Baker had become a kind of unofficial mediator between the parties involved. His guilt for having involuntarily participated in Oswald's plan motivated him to help in the family reconciliation, but it had also forced him to confront his own tendency to avoid conflicts. "Marina, you're doing the right thing," he said, watching Iris play with other children in the park. "Sometimes the greatest challenges lead us to discover our true strength." Cassius had transformed in ways that surprised even himself. For the first time in decades, he had put aside his obsession with absolute control and had begun to truly listen to the people around him. He had discovered that several company employees had valuable suggestions that he had never considered, simply because he had never asked their opinions. More significantly, he had assumed personal responsibility for Iris's well-being. Every morning, he took her to the most reputable private school in town, and every afternoon, he picked her up to spend a few hours together. Initially, the girl had been cautious with him, but gradually, she had begun to accept his presence. "Uncle Cassius," Iris said during one of their afternoon walks through the historic downtown, "do you think Grandpa Oswald will show up at the 4th of July party?" "I hope so, Iris," he replied, crouching down to be at the girl's height. "But even if he doesn't show up, we're going to continue taking care of each other, okay?" Cassius's transformation did not go unnoticed by Constance. Although she still maintained a cautious distance, she could not deny that the man she now knew was completely different from the selfish and controlling brother who had expelled her family years ago. "He's really changed," she commented to Dr. Baker during an afternoon when they were watching Cassius teaching Iris how to fly a kite in the park. "I never thought I would see my nephew demonstrating so much patience and affection. People can change when they face the real consequences of their actions," Dr. Baker replied. "Cassius has finally understood what really matters in life." Meanwhile, in a simple house on the outskirts of the Santa Rita farm, Oswald Montgomery observed events through weekly reports he received from a loyal employee. At 68, the patriarch had lost significant weight due to his heart condition, but his eyes still shone with the keen intelligence that had built a cotton empire. "He's really changing," he murmured to himself, reading about Cassius's transformations. "Maybe there's still hope for our family." Oswald's condition had deteriorated during the months of isolation, but he refused to seek medical treatment until he was sure that his plan had worked. Dr. Baker secretly visited him once a week, monitoring his health and begging him to return to town. "Oswald, you can't continue like this," the doctor said during one of his visits. "Your condition is worsening. Constance and Iris need you." "Not yet," Oswald replied, his voice weaker than before. "I need to be sure that Cassius has changed genuinely, not just out of guilt or fear." The 4th of July party in Harmony Creek arrived with all its colorful and vibrant tradition. The streets were filled with streamers, bonfires were lit on every corner, and the aroma of roasted corn and spiced cider hung in the air. It was the most important celebration of the year in town, a time when all families gathered to celebrate unity and abundance. Marina had decided to sponsor one of the central bonfires, an attempt to rebuild her reputation in the community through concrete gestures of kindness. To her surprise, several families approached her during the night, expressing support and understanding for the difficult situation she had faced. "Mrs. Sullivan," said an elderly lady, "we all know that you have always treated our families with respect and dignity. A scandal doesn't erase decades of good work." Constance had brought Iris to the party, dressing her in a new dress that Cassius had insisted on buying. The girl was radiant, running between the bonfires and playing with other children as any normal child should do. "Mommy, look! Uncle Cassius is trying to do the square dance!" Iris shouted, pointing to where Cassius was trying to follow the traditional steps with a clumsiness that made everyone laugh. Constance could not contain a smile as she saw her nephew, always so serious and controlled, allowing himself to be ridiculous in public for the simple pleasure of entertaining her daughter. It was almost 11 o'clock at night when a murmur spread through the crowd. A familiar figure walked slowly down Main Street, leaning on a wooden cane. Oswald Montgomery had returned. The silence that followed was profound and respectful. The entire town knew the story of the empty casket, and everyone understood that they were witnessing a historic moment in the life of the most influential family in the region. Cassius was the first to move, walking slowly towards his father. When the two men met in the center of the park, surrounded by hundreds of attentive eyes, Cassius did something that no one expected. He knelt before Oswald. "Dad, forgive me," he said, his voice laden with genuine emotion. "Forgive me for betraying your trust, for lying, for causing so much suffering to our family." Oswald looked at his son kneeling before him, then at Constance, who was approaching slowly with Iris by the hand, and finally at the crowd that was watching them in respectful silence. "Get up, my son," he said, his voice weak but firm. "Forgiveness has already been granted the moment you chose to change." Constance reached them, tears running freely down her face. "Oswald, my brother." "Constance," he whispered, extending his arms to embrace her. "I'm so sorry for all those lost years. I'm so sorry for not fighting for you when I should have. And I'm so sorry for being so proud to come back," she replied, returning the embrace. Iris watched the scene with her big, intelligent eyes, trying to understand the complex emotions of the adults around her. When Oswald crouched down to be at her height, the girl smiled with a purity that made the patriarch's heart squeeze. "So you're my real grandpa?" she asked. "Yes, my little one," he replied, gently caressing her face. "And you are the most precious thing this family has ever had." Dr. Baker approached the group, relieved to see Oswald alive and relatively well, but concerned about his frail appearance. "Oswald, we need to take you to the hospital for a full examination," he said discreetly. "Tomorrow, Reginald," replied the patriarch. "Tonight is for the family." Marina, watching from afar, felt a mixture of relief and hope. Oswald's return meant that the truth about the empty casket would finally be understood by all, clearing her reputation and allowing her to rebuild her business on more solid foundations. In the weeks that followed the 4th of July party, the Montgomery family underwent a complete restructuring. Cassius officially cancelled all plans to sell the company and implemented a profit-sharing program for all employees. Constance was appointed Director of Human Resources, bringing her unique perspective on the needs of the workers. Iris was enrolled in the best school in town and began to live in a comfortable house with Constance, but maintaining daily contact with Oswald and Cassius. For the first time in her life, she had a complete and loving family. Dr. Baker established more rigorous protocols in his medical practice and began to be more direct in his communications with patients, learning that avoiding conflicts was not always the best approach. Marina not only rebuilt her reputation, but transformed her funeral home into a model of compassionate care, offering emotional support services for grieving families. Oswald lived another 18 months after his revelation, long enough to see Iris learn to read, to teach Cassius the true values of family leadership, and to reconcile completely with Constance. When he finally passed away, he was surrounded by a united family that had learned the true meaning of love, forgiveness, and unity. Little Iris, now 6 years old, would forever cherish the lessons she had learned about the importance of truth, the courage to face one's own mistakes, and the transformative power of forgiveness. And at the annual 4th of July festivities, the Montgomery family gathered to celebrate not only the traditions of the land, but also the miracle of a second chance that had saved them all. If you like this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring videos every day that will make your life happier. Comment on what you thought of my story, giving a rating from 0 to 10, and thank you very much.